Hello, this is Dr. Harris, and I'd like to talk to you a little bit about public speaking outlines. Your outline for public speaking will be a little bit different than that which you may have done or seen for essays, for instance. So let's walk through some of these different things, and I'll point out exactly why we are doing what we are doing. So the first one is pay particular attention to outline format. A sample is shown below. We'll see that later on. Number two, centered at the top of the page should be your title for your talk with your name centered on the next line. This is for when you hand in your outline to your professor. So your title is not informative talk, but rather something like famous last words. It doesn't have to be elaborate. It just has to tell us what you're talking about. And then number three, start with an opening paragraph of about 2 to 3 sentences, giving an indication of the direction you'll be taking in the full opening. So for the outline that you're going to turn in with your speech, and I prefer that you turn it in right when you get up to speak. So you'll need to make 2 copies if you're going to speak off the outline itself. I want you to start with an opening and give me a couple of sentences, just giving me an indication, telling me what it is that you're doing with the opening. I want to know that you've planned out an attention-getting opening, as opposed to just getting up there and saying, well, I'd like to talk about how to tie your shoe. Yeah, that's not a good opening, right? Something that will grab our attention. So just a sentence or 2 is all you really need so that I know that you've given it some thought and you've actually planned this out. Number 4, never enumerate your opening or your closing for that matter, because that's going to end up confusing you and your audience if you make the mistake of calling what is really your second point your third point because it has the Roman numeral 3 in front of it. So only the body of the speech is actually enumerated. For instance, if we scroll down, we can see, here's an example here. Notice here that the opening does not have any kind of enumeration with it. So your first point actually is your first point. Your second point is your second point. That's really going to become important as you go on and start to give your speech, simply because you could very easily look at that number and say, now, secondly, when actually you haven't even given the first point yet. Okay. Main points are indicated by Roman numerals followed by a period. Subpoints are indicated by capital letters followed by a period. Subpoints, Arabic numerals followed by a period, and subpoints indicated by lowercase letters followed by a period. That's usually about as far as what you want to go with a speech. A couple things that concern us there. If you go too much more in detail, this is a speech. You're giving it orally. They're having to listen to it, and they're having to try to keep track of where you are. So it's not like a book where if they get confused, they can go back and reread a couple of chapters or a couple of pages at least and try to figure out what's going on. You can't go back in a live speech. So you've got to think clarity, always clarity. So we have to keep it as simple as possible. The Roman numerals followed by a period for your main points. The period, notice I've emphasized that, it's very important. The reason for the period is found down here in number 9. The reason for the period after the number or letter is to make sure you don't mistake the Roman numeral 1 for the word I, or the capital letter A for the word You can see where that's going to make a real difference. If you're just glancing down and you see that and you think that's not the Roman numeral 1, but rather you think it's the word I, you're going to actually say that, and that's going to sound strange. The period tells you and indicates to you that this is simply a numbering device. It is not part of the point that you're actually making. Number 10, you would rarely One to go beyond sub points in an oral presentation, as it would be tremendously difficult for your audience to follow, as we said. Number 11, points and subpoints may be in one of three forms: a keyword, a phrase, or a complete sentence. Oftentimes, you'll hear me refer to them as a word, phrase, or sentence. If a complete sentence, be sure and start it with a capital letter and end it with a period. No ending punctuation for phrases or words. Now, the reason that we only have words, phrases, and sentences to pick from, the reason that's so important is for the next point, number 12, parallelism. And when I talk about parallelism, that's what I'm talking about, is I'm talking about maintaining a parallelism with the similar points in an outline in the same format. So in other words, you don't mix and match on similar points. 1A has to be parallel with 1B. In other words, if you chose a phrase for 1A, then a phrase needs to be part of 1B, not a sentence, not a key word. 1A has to be parallel with 1B. 2B does not need to be parallel with 1B, but it could be. Let me show you real quickly. Let's go down. Let's go down here. Okay, so let's say right here in this outline, so we've got A, utensils. Now, these are the 3 points. Okay, mixing bowl, wooden spoon, measuring cups. So notice how these are parallel. It doesn't say you will need a mixing bowl, period, a full sentence. And then number 2, wooden spoon. And then number 3, cup. Okay, that's not parallel. It helps the audience be able to clearly hear and understand and follow along when they see this parallelism. So the way I think of it is this A, utensils, I think of it as a pie. Okay, and we can divide a pie into pieces. I'm using red ink here, so let's make this pie, let's say it's a cherry pie. I like cherry pie. So if I take this piece out of this cherry pie, and I put it on a plate, what have I got? What am I going to eat? I'm going to eat cherry pie. Now, if I take this piece out and put it on a plate, what am I going to eat over here? It better be cherry pie. In other words, this slice is parallel to this slice. All the slices come out of the same pie, so they all match each other. So these need to match. They all come out of here, so they need to match each other. So we don't have a phrase and a sentence and a word, but rather these are phrases, it looks like. All right, let's go back up and see where else we are. Erase this. So we talked about number 11 and number 12, parallelism. Number 13, you can write as outline that's entirely full sentences or entirely phrases or entirely key words. More than likely, they're going to contain 2 or even all 3 of those formats, but we must be consistent with our parallelism. Number 14 is a very important point. You may never have only one sub-point. So the way we say it is, if you have an A, you must have at least a B. If you have a 1, you have to have at least a 2. Notice, point number 3 was mix the stuff. Notice that we have not put in an A here because there's only 1 point. So instead, what Kendra has done is Kendra has simply indented, she's moved it in, and she's actually made it italic so it would stand out. She did not put the letter A there. The reason she didn't put it there is because there's no B, there's no second point. If she would have put the letter A, and she's glancing down, she sees that what might come out of her mouth is simply, okay, now when we're talking about mixing the stuff, first mix the ingredients until you can no longer see any dry white flour. Now the reason you don't want to do that is because the moment you say first, the audience is automatically listening for a second. Their brain is tuned in, and there is no second. So that's going to confuse them, and it might even confuse you as well. Let's go back up here and see if there's anything else. So remember, if you have an A, you have to have at least a B. And if you have a 1, you have to have at least a 2. End your outline with a closing paragraph of 2 to 3 sentences, giving an indication of the direction you'll be taking in the full closing. Do not just say, well, I think I can wing this, and you end up saying something like, well, that's all. That's a very weak closing. All right, so I hope that this has helped you a little bit in clarifying outline structure.